The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Good afternoon and welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada on Reality Radio 101. Send us an email right now. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi everyone, I'm so glad to be back with you again today at the Bear Psychology Radio Show, where we are bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. I know that we have these conversations every month, and today we're going to talk about what it's like to use mindfulness or meditation practices as a wellness practice. And it really, really goes way beyond that because, meditation, contemplative exercises, different ways to slow down, reflect, grapple with what's going on inside of you. If you've ever thought about meditating, or you've wondered if your life would be better if you had some kind of practice to manage your stress or anxiety, well, then this is absolutely the show for you. I know that sometimes this idea of meditation can, in some ways, be a push-pull. I'm interested. I'd like to do that. Hey, I should make time for that. And yet, this sense of like, do I really want to do that? I mean, what about sitting there, for minutes on end, doing nothing, not being occupied with something? Will I get bored? Will I start feeling afraid? A lot of people do, by the way. And meditating, learning how to meditate can be life-changing. I had an amazing conversation with a client last week who was telling me about, learning how to take these practices on board, trying to practice and focus. This individual had a very, very significant trauma history and was really struggling, wasn't even able to work for a while. But he was saying that as he was starting to learn how to meditate, it gave him the ability to stop just reacting and start just noticing. And he notices that it changed his ability to really kind of deal with those bumpy moments in life and better be able to kind of reflect and notice, but not react. And that was the game changer for him, because now we're talking about return to work strategies, and he's feeling more excited and less afraid in life. And, I think there is some real truth about the power of meditation to, increase our ability to face strong emotions, to increase our sense of relaxation, to change any automatic reactions that we have. We can really learn how to do that by developing a kind of mindful position around what's surfacing within inside of ourselves, being able to increase our control, increase our sense of self-compassion. We're going to talk about that a little bit because self-compassion is a really, really interesting piece. Learn how to, avoid avoidance, let go of self-judgment, and allow us to have a more balanced perspective. And in order to do all that today, we have this amazing guest, Carla Weinstein, who is trained as a lawyer, but made this huge pivot in life to go into wellness and meditation or mindfulness training. And she has become a real shining light at the charity that I run. Carla has taken the lead role in offering all the trauma informed meditation programs that we have been offering over the last, well, I guess it's over 2 years now. And I have to say that the kind of feedback that we get when people take Carla's classes are pretty impressive. So without hesitating any longer, I want to thank you very much, Carla, for joining us today. And I guess I want to just start by asking you, how did you arrive at teaching meditation when really you were trained as a lawyer?
The never-ending question. Well, thank you, Anna. Firstly, I'm very happy to be here with you. As you know, I am always in my element when I'm talking about mindfulness and meditation because of the personal benefits I've experienced in learning and using it. And as you say, because of how I see through the classes that we run at the trauma practice, the growing benefits that people who have survived trauma or living with traumatic experiences have been able to take some of these skills and repurpose them in their lives to incredible effect. How did I get to mindfulness and meditation? I think the truth is, I actually once heard mindfulness described as science meets grandmother's wisdom. And those are two things that I have always gravitated toward.
Huh.
On the one hand, I've always been drawn to places where I could slow down, spend time alone, wonder, contemplate, particularly when I was young. And as we grow older, our lives get busier. We realize that, if we're not deliberate about creating those kind of spaces, they don't just happen. And I'm not talking about vacation. I'm talking more about, importantly, disciplining our minds and our bodies to create and incorporate moments of presence pretty much every day. And I think, when I sort of look back, I went through many years of my life, I would now say rather unskillfully. And I don't mean that I wasn't adept or good at lots of things, but that I was totally unself-aware, perhaps reflective and thoughtful, but not super aware. And I think there was a point in my life, probably around the time after I'd completed law school and taken the bar and was working in corporate real estate, that I realized that, I was sort of out of line and out of touch with where I wanted to be. I was living a life that, didn't necessarily feel great in my body, and I felt a little bit disconnected between, how I was day to day and how I felt. And I think there, as always happens with big life events, these are impactful moments when we sort of contemplate purpose and what are we doing and what direction are we going and how do we feel. And there was a time, early in my career where I experienced several things over the course of about a year and a half. And that was losing 3 people in my life that I loved. So really being exposed for the first time in a significant way to grief. And at the same time that those 3 big losses occurred for me, I also had my first child, which was also obviously something that gave me incredible perspective, but was unlike any other relationship I'd ever had. And so whereas I'd lived with people I'd loved before, what I started recognizing about having a young child in my house was that I was constantly having a mirror held up to me. And I was constantly looking at this kid and thinking to myself, why am I reacting this way? How am I managing? How am I feeling? And it came down for me to, how am I showing up in life? Am I really showing up in a way that is meaningful and relevant and in tune and connected? And that question began to bleed into everything for me, and created this shift from working in a more corporate environment toward this path of wellness that continues to be an incredible, eye-opening, constantly experience and journey for me.
This is such an interesting story, Carla, because, this idea that you actually woke up to yourself, you recognized that you couldn't continue living in the way that you were living and have a meaningful and connected life. And I love the fact that you say, your child was your mirror, and was this the way that I was showing up? I mean, that would be a really good moment to be a fly on the wall, where, you're recognizing yourself and saying, this is not what I intend, and this has to change. And, I imagine that on some level, it must have taken a lot of courage, but it sounds like you were almost in a position where here you were, and life was taking you down a certain pathway. And in order to live in a true way, you had to go. So it just sounds like it's a kind of big shift. Now, I know that you've taken on meditation as a real core part of your life, but you've also joined in to an organization, the Trauma Practice for Healthy Communities, the charity where you teach the Trauma Informed Meditation. And I'm just wondering what it was like for you to kind of join an organization and start teaching to people who had experienced, terrible events, losses, traumas. What was that like for you?
Well, I think, part of what made or drew me, I would say, to working with people who had experienced trauma is that my path toward meditation and mindfulness, while it was obvious that I had to make shifts in my life, it wasn't necessarily an easy path. When I began to learn about meditation and mindfulness, there was a lot of resistance, and I was very skeptical about how this would work, how I would incorporate this in my life, whether it actually did work. There was almost a lack of faith there as well. And what I began to notice more than acceptance with mindfulness and meditation was at first incredible resistance to it. And I think this is what we see in a lot of people who have experienced trauma, is that it's actually not easy at first to access mindfulness and meditation, particularly in settings where the work is not trauma informed. Because if you think about it, if you go to a regular meditation class, someone's going to tell you to sit down and close your eyes and focus on your breath. And to be honest, for a lot of people who have experienced trauma, firstly, there can be a lot of chronic pain in the body. So sitting for long periods of time is not feasible. Paying attention or being in one place for more than a minute is sometimes not feasible. Sometimes closing the eyes can trigger, horrific images and memories that people aren't ready yet to experience or don't want to be re-experiencing. Turning toward the breath, if you think about it too, particularly during COVID, doing meditations around the breath was really triggering for a lot of people. So I think with my own sense of skepticism, it actually helped to inform me about, and think about really, what are ways that we can teach people to come to this place of stillness and yet curate it, make it accessible for people who really come from a world of different backgrounds and have such unique personal experiences, also knowing that the practices that we're teaching are so beneficial and universal in some way. We just have to find the correct door, the correct opening. So yeah. I think it lent itself.
It's interesting because I mean, these are the kinds of things that I've been hearing from people for a long time in terms of even beginning, breathing practices, which I've taught in my clinic for, the last 20 years. I've been teaching breathing practices to clients and have found them to be an incredible key to, to give them a chance to alleviate some of the inner pain and suffering that a person might feel. But when it comes to really sitting for any length of time, it can be so difficult. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions for people who are trying to do meditation, where they have an idea it's going to be like this, and I'm going to do this thing. Meditation has become, and mindfulness has become, very much part of the lexicon. People talk about it, they think that they should do it, and then they try to do it, and they are left with all sorts of frustrations. And I wonder, what kinds of ways are you helping your students to deal with these frustrations of where they kind of get it wrong? And I do like what you say, it's true that when you first sit down in a meditation class, somebody might just say, sit down, relax, clear your mind, focus inside. And it's like, no, I don't want to focus inside. This is awful. So
Yeah.
in terms of, what are the misconceptions out there? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so look, I think ultimately, and I will say this, before we talk about some of the misconceptions, but I think being able to eventually get to focus on the breath, to be able to use the breath as a tool, is one of the most incredible gifts that meditation gives. But as I say, I don't think it is accessible off the bat for everybody. And so in the way that we teach our program, what we look at are lots of different ways that we can meditate. It can be done in many, many different capacities. And so one of the things, for instance, that I tend to use at the beginning or I should say early on in the sessions, is just having people focus on a routine activity that they already do. And anyone who's a little bit versed in mindfulness has seen that, the goal in meditation training is to focus on an object, recognize when the mind has sort of drifted or left that point of focus, and then gently, when you recognize that, return the attention back to that point of focus. And really, with that kind of training in mind, focus, recognize, return, which I tend to use the acronym FRR, we can apply that to pretty much anything. So certainly we can apply it to the breath. We focus on the breath. The minute the mind wanders and moves away, we bring it back. But for many people, that's not possible. And so why not focus on something in our day that we already do? So I always describe, I have a very intricate coffee making process in the morning. And I use that personally and often use that as a way to describe a way to practice meditation. So, I go into the practice of making my coffee in the morning with a very deliberate attention to pay attention to everything that I'm doing in a very almost sensual way. So using my senses, making sure that my attention is fully present on the activity that I'm performing. And so, that involves, opening up the bag of beans and sort of, maybe jiggling it around and listening to the sound of the beans, and using my sense of smell to take a deep inhale and notice what happens in my body when that's happening. And the minute my mind starts to go to, do I need to wake the kids? Is everyone going to be ready for school? What have I got on my agenda today? I sort of have to pause and recognize I've lost my point of focus and I need to come back. And so I come back to pouring the beans into the grinder and listening to the sound of the grinder. And again, if the mind wanders away, drawing my attention back. And this goes on and on throughout my whole process to my eventual cup of coffee, and sipping it and tasting it and really being there as I'm doing that in the present moment for that period. And I find that, when we give clients the permission to be able to to train their meditation or train themselves in meditation with something that they're already doing during the day, this really covers a lot of ground, because they're A, practicing their meditation, B, they're not adding necessarily an extra something, because that's something that often people find, I don't have time in my day to meditate, right? I'm asking them to do something that they already do. Can you walk up a flight of stairs mindfully? Can you wash your hands or the dishes mindfully? Can you drive mindfully? And that's not always an easy one for people in the city of Toronto. So
Wow.
that's one way.
I just love that. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, Carla, I just have to have Carla's coffee in the morning, because that would be a good thing to have. Like, you know, when food is prepared or coffee is prepared in a certain way, I wonder if we could taste the taste that comes through when something has been handled with such care. You know, I always wonder, you know, what are we bringing to every moment in our, you know, the typical things that we do. And, you know, it was just making me taste the coffee and smell the coffee as you were describing it. So
Well,
that's actually really, really interesting. I love the way you describe that, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't know if everybody caught this, but you used an acronym, MFRR.
FRR.
Oh, I thought you said mind, focus, recognize, return, but it's just focus, recognize, return.
Exactly.
Let's go a little bit more slowly over that, because it sounds to me like that would be a good acronym for people to take home with them today.
Sure. Yeah. The truth is that, you know, when we are training our mind to pay attention in this way, it's helpful for us to choose an object to focus on. Typically, we'll use our breath, right? This is an easy anchor. We have it all the time. You know, as people say, it can travel with us. So it's always on us. It makes mindfulness something, or meditation something that we can do anytime, anywhere. But we can pick many things as our anchors. So as I just described, we can pick an activity as our anchor. We can pick sound, for instance, as our anchor. We can pick a kind of open awareness where we're just looking to focus on anything that comes up, anything that we sense. And then the minute that we notice that the mind has moved away from this point of focus, which is the first R, recognize. Recognition is, you know, I say this word probably 100 times a day. Recognizing is part of this process of bringing consciousness to otherwise automatic experiences. And so recognizing, oh, my mind's over here, my mind's thinking about this, my mind's thinking, right? As opposed to paying attention to this object of focus that I've chosen. And then the final R is return, right? So if we've chosen a point of focus and we recognize that our mind has wandered, this return carries an element of gentleness or kindness, not what we typically do, which can frustrate a lot of early meditators. You know, oh God, I can't do this. Here I am again. My mind's wandered again. I'm just not capable of this, right? You can hear when we are recognizing and attempting to return, or we won't even let ourselves return because judgment gets in the way there. It's important to know that this second R, this return, involves a kind of softness. You know, can I just see, okay, I've gone a little bit off track and I need to come back now. So I'm just going to come back and begin again, right? Begin again. It's as if it didn't even happen. And here I am again, focusing again on this point of focus that I've chosen.
This actually, you know, brings us to self-compassion, which is for many people, as soon as we pivot into something that we're not doing perfectly well, or, you know, we're a bit disappointed with ourselves about some kind of performance, or we have a notion that we should achieve something and we're not quite there, we get into this place of blaming or shaming ourselves. And I know with mindfulness, you know, particularly with the work of Kristin Neff, there's been a lot of research on something called self-compassion. That is not a new term in the meditation field, but it was really brought into, you know, Western awareness with the work of Kristin Neff. And she's done some amazing work and research, particularly on self-compassion. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how important that piece is on addressing what you just spoke about.
Well, certainly self-compassion is a necessary component of practicing mindfulness and meditation. And I weave it through our program in every single session because of the critical nature it has in teaching us how to be able to be in moments that we otherwise find really painful and really difficult. And so I actually think that self-compassion starts at the very beginning with just looking at ourselves as human beings with, the good and the bad and the easy and the difficult. And, I think I often am talking about this with my kids who we can see how early on, whether personally or at home or in the context of larger culture, we're so very hard on ourselves in so many ways. And the research really shows that, a certain element of challenge is what helps us to learn how to be resilient, learn how to grow. But there always seems to sneak in this kind of, almost punitive critical voice. And so it really begins with looking at ourselves as human beings with all these things. And as I was saying, the way that I talk to my children about it, and I think a lot of people can relate to is, would you think about or speak to a friend that way? I think self-compassion for a lot of people, again, it can incite a little bit of awkwardness or discomfort. Why would I be soft or gentle or loving with myself? And I perfectly honestly felt that way too when I first started learning about mindfulness and meditation. But I think the thing that happens is that we have to think about language that we can use to talk about some of these things that allow us to get over that hump. So, we don't have to necessarily think about self-compassion, as something super soft and sweet all the time. It can be friendship or support or offering understanding. And this is a lens. I think about it as a lens that we have to look through as we start to explore our own personal experience and history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, with this whole concept of self-compassion, I really think it brings about a deep sense of where many people suffer, which is this place where it's like we are not kind to ourselves. We have this edge in our culture where we seem to be in a place of great self-judgment. And I think as soon as you start meditating, I think it naturally comes to the surface. We become aware of how chronic that voice is, that negative internal language. So then this has to be part of the conversation. Hey, looking at, what you're saying to yourself and how you're saying it to yourself and noticing how profoundly negative that voice is can be a real shock to people when they first start to meditate, the harshness of the inner voice, where that comes from. I'm not suggesting that people should just bypass that and say, well, I'm saying negative things to myself, so I'm going to just stop. Of course, it doesn't happen that way. I mean, we have this place of grappling with inside, that is needed. I want to read some of our listeners' emails now and see what people are saying about this conversation. So this is from Frank, and Frank says, hello to Dr. Baranowski from the U.S. Happy Thanksgiving to all of your U.S. listeners. Yes, well, there are a lot of U.S. listeners. Thank you, Frank. Frank says meditation is the absolute best way to help with trauma, stress, and life in general. This is such a very important topic to discuss. I agree. I mean, when I look at some of the research that's out there on meditation and mindfulness practices, I just get really excited because, I mean, there's quite a few research studies, and there's more and more as time goes on. There was one study with a team of researchers, and they took a number of veterans through an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy program, and they just found that the veterans who received this MBCT program had a very significant reduction in symptoms of PTSD, depression. They were better at taking care of themselves, accepting themselves. Their sleep was better. They noticed their pain indices were lower. There were just so many ways in which they were seeing improvements. All that because we learned how to sit with ourselves. So it's pretty interesting. Here's another one. This is from Nancy, who says, any tips and tricks for meditation? Thank you. Carla, what are your thoughts?
I have so many. I first of all, what I will say is meditation is a practice. And so I think treat it as such. Like anything new that we're learning, we're bringing our own capacities and bents and likes and dislikes. So I would say start with an openness and an inclination to explore lots of different types of meditation and mindfulness practices. And I think that, for someone who's just starting out, I will say that one thing you can do if you're interested in practicing formal meditation, it can be very beneficial to be consistent in that practice. So for instance, choosing to do meditation at the same time every day so that you start to cue yourself, your mind and your body, so that at this point in the day, no matter which day, you know that you're going to be turning toward your meditation practice and beginning to practice. Find a space that is relatively distraction or disturbance free. That is not always easy for everyone, but it can be helpful. And then begin slowly. I would say oftentimes people come out of the gates really wanting to try and do so much. This is a new thing. We're coming up to that time of year where people make resolutions. I'm going to do mindfulness. I'm going to start, really getting more involved in my practice. Start slow. And I think it's really important to note that the things that we sit and don't like about meditation, or that we find that we don't like or aren't working for us, are as informative for us as the things that we learn that we like. So explore lots of different types of meditations. I would encourage using an app, and there are lots of them out there. Some of them give free week-long trials for you to explore. Some of them, are free, but there are lots of amazing ones out there. And I would say, try a breath practice, try a visualization practice, try a mantra practice, try a body scan. Try a walking practice. And one more thing I'll add is just a personal thing that I do that I find very beneficial is, I think a good place to start for most people, I do a meditation practice every morning before I get out of bed when my alarm goes off. It doesn't require moving or throwing the covers off or anything like that. I just lie there and do a little body scan and sort of check in from head to toe. How are things feeling on a sensational level? Like, where are the aches and pains today? How am I feeling mood-wise? Just a general feeling tone. Like, have I woken up with lots of energy and am I in a good mood? Or am I feeling a little bit low mood? And do I need to maybe make adjustments for that in my day moving forward? And then I also sort of check in and say, what do I need and what can I bring into my day, right? So I think this is a good, easy, quick, that can take about a minute or two in the morning, place to start. Yeah.
I love that you make things so accessible, Carla. I think because there's so much information on meditation available these days, the fact that you just say, okay, you wake up in the morning, do a body scan. And what I kind of heard you say is, you connect, you notice what's happening inside, you reflect, you notice, you accept, you ask yourself what you need today, you make these internal shifts. It's a very kind of accepting position. And like you said, you don't have to turn this into some monster of a practice that you can't really get to. I remember when I started to first learn about meditation years ago, and it was a big undertaking. And then I remember, mindfulness-based stress reduction, the John Kabat-Zinn stuff. He used to teach people to sit in meditation for an hour a day. I mean, they took people through lengthy practices. They ran very comprehensive hospital-based programs, and they got people to do very, very deep and lengthy practices. And I think that it's nice to approach it in this kind of more easing in manner, because I think you would have more uptake from a larger number of people who could then potentially enjoy the benefits of what is being offered now. Now, I do want to say, because I think people are going to be really interested in what you're doing, Carla. We are talking potentially about offering a program to raise funds for our charity, the Trauma Practice, and be able to continue supporting your awesome work with the charity. So there will be a one-day event in the new year that we will be offering, and will be posted to the Trauma Practice for Healthy Communities, the traumapractice.org website. And I think it'll be sometime in the spring of next year. Certainly they can learn a lot from you, because I do think that you take a very unique approach, and you bring this great awareness with you around your practices as well. So just so people are aware of that, that there may be an opportunity for you to learn directly with Carla and get a better sense of what she's doing and how she's doing it, and listen to more of her stories as well. This one is from Rita. Rita says, fantastic. Love this, doctor. Such a good show, especially since the Christmas holiday is coming. So many people are very stressed. Okay, Carla, let's talk about that. People are preparing to go into the holiday season. They are stressed. And what ways could meditation or mindfulness help them? And by the way, are there any particular apps that you love that might be able to be used by people trying to use them to help them deal with all this?
Sure. So, this is actually a great transition, because, we're talking about the difference between, sitting for more formal meditation, and then alternately, practicing in a way that is accessible for our day-to-day, and being able to bring some of these practices. Really, for me, the biggest joy I have, the biggest impact I see, is when people are able to take their practices from intellect, from learning, from sitting, and put them into their daily lives. Like, how do I deal with all my family that's coming in for Thanksgiving? Or how do I manage, when we're all together for long periods of time? What am I going to do day to day? How do I prepare? I'm hosting, how do I make sure everything's in order and the house looks nice, and all these things that we worry about? I had a colleague once drop the term daily mental hygiene, and it really struck me, and I kind of took it and ran, because I thought to myself, while I have immense regard and am a huge fan of formal practices and encourage them and work with people to develop the ability to sit for long periods of time, to me, the biggest impact my work can have is if people are practicing daily mental hygiene, being able to take some of these smaller skills and tools and implement them in their lives day to day, so that generally people are walking around being more conscious, interacting in ways that are more loving and kind, and ultimately bring better well-being both to the person who's offering it and the community at large. So I will say, the place that everyone starts when they're first starting to learn mindfulness and meditation is just awareness, right? So when someone says to me, okay, we're going into the stressful time, of holiday season, what do? I say, you know what? First, just notice when you feel stress, right? What does stress feel like in our body? We're so used to living with such exorbitant amounts of stress for chronic periods of time that we're almost desensitized to it in some ways. And so we just kind of power through. We just add things on our plate and do more and more and just get through. And at the end of the day, or at the end of these periods, we're fried.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
why you have all these people who go through the, a family event, and instead of walking away and saying, "Hey, that was lovely, that was relaxing," it's like, "Oh my God, it was so tense and it was so uncomfortable and it was so tough, and I had to do all these things." And they just, it's such a tragedy, because what could be, just allowing yourself to be in this setting, and even if part of that means noticing that, you're a little sad that, your uncle kind of said something maybe snippy, or, your aunt and uncle were, not getting along, or you noticed that, a cousin seemed kind of tearful, or somebody was, talking over everybody. If you notice these things, I mean, it happens in every social gathering. No, we don't have perfect interactions, but I guess the place of being able to watch this all unfold, when you have a practice of watching yourself, you have a way better chance of being in a social setting and just noticing what your inner lived experience is like when you are encountering an event with other people. And that, I'm a real big fan of practices. So when you have those practices and you've been working on them, they sure do help you to notice what is surfacing within inside of yourself. So you don't have to carry as much of the burden of that, and learn more, like, I love what you said, you get desensitized and you power through. If one of the things that you were going to learn in meditation was to actually, as you said before, Carla, notice when you feel distress. You don't necessarily have to do something about it. You can actually learn how to be friendlier with the inner lived experience of that, what you're describing as a stressed feeling, and what happens when that occurs. Here's another listener. She says, and this is from Pam. So thank you so much, Pam, for writing in. Hello, Bear Psychology. Carla is originally from Dallas, Texas. What brought her here to Canada?
Love.
Now there's a good answer. Yes, there we go. Shall we just leave it at that?
Listen, I'm originally, my parents are actually South African, and were immigrants to the US. And my siblings and I were all three raised in Dallas, Texas. And our parents encouraged in us something I think really unbelievable, which was this interest in exploring other places and people from different backgrounds and different cultures. And I think we all took that to heart, because we all left home around age 18 and went to different places. And since then, our lives have ultimately, we've ended up in different places. My sister's now back in Dallas, but I found when I moved to Toronto, it's funny being so close to the border. Growing up in the US, I actually didn't know that much about Canada in general. And I recently, just a few years ago, became a citizen as well. And I'm a very proud Canadian. And so, but I think, I guess the point is, being here has really imbued me with a sense of, lifting myself up out of a place that is home, right? Like, and there is a big metaphor here for mindfulness which is, pulling myself out of one context, placing myself in another. While I still love, spending time alone, I'm very socially and community driven. And I think that when we're sort of testing ourselves by moving from one place to another and learning about that place and making new home in that place, we are using all these skills and practices that we learn in our mindfulness, and that we actually learn as coping skills just as human beings, but become part of our practice, and something that when we figure that we're able to do, we begin to apply more deliberately. Not sure if that's where we wanted to go, but that's where we ended up.
Well, all I can say is, like, we're super happy to have you here, and congratulations on becoming a Canadian citizen. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Here, but I like where you started. I mean, you started with love, and love is a great driver. So I thought that was the perfect answer. This is from Eric, and Eric says, "Hello, is there a proper way to breathe for meditation? Mouth to nose? A nose to mouth? Thank you."
Like everything, the answer is simple and more convoluted than you'd probably like. In our program, we teach lots of different kinds of breathing practices. So we teach some breathing practices where we do use, inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth, where we're sort of manipulating the breath in a certain way. But what I will say is, generally speaking, when we're practicing meditation, we want our lips gently closed, and we're tending to inhale and exhale through the nostrils.
Yeah, there's, breathing practices are very, very ancient, and there are many different breathing approaches, of course. And, depending on what the body of knowledge is, which, teaching, history you come from, there's an enormous variety. So, just to recognize that, if you're fortunate, you can actually learn many different ways of doing breathing practices. One of my favorite breathing practices actually includes an element of breathing through the mouth. But it really, really depends on kind of the training. I've been learning yoga in the Iyengar tradition since I was 16 years old. And, one of my favorite practices an alternate nostril breathing. And it's one of the best practices I ever use when I'm feeling either like, a headache's coming on, or I'm just feeling really tired. There's nothing that I find more enervating. So, there's many different ways to do this. There's no one proper way, so, learn, be open-minded, get your hands on as much material, and, stay open, because where you are today will dictate the practices that work best for you. And the idea is not to get too rigid, at least in the early stages when you're learning meditation, because, there's just so much to learn and so many different ways to learn as well. Helga says, do you have a website that explains how to meditate properly? Well, I just want to say, Carla does have a website, and she's got great resources and materials and blog posts in there. So I would actually like to just reference everybody to thedropinproject.com, and you can look at, what Carla is offering. She does write quite a bit about mindfulness in a real straightforward way. She writes about herself. I would really encourage you to go and look at the website. But I would also say, because somebody's mentioning, are there any books on this subject? And this is from Anne. And I'll just say, Anne, thank you for that. There are a number of books on meditation that I really like. I have in front of me something by Rachel Goldsmith Toro, who wrote Mindfulness Skills for Trauma and PTSD, Practices for Resilience, for Recovery and Resilience. I love this book because it's so good. It has research. It has phenomenal practices in it. Is a pretty kind of structured exercises, very simply written, but, it's a really good way to learn about meditation and also pick up wonderful practices, especially if you're struggling with stress or anxiety or trauma. because it is a very much a trauma-informed meditation book. And I also have a lovely one by Cameron Keeley Freud, who wrote Meditations, a Guided Journal, Mindfulness Exercises to Inspire Your Practice. It's actually a guided journal for women, but really when I look at it, it looks like it's just a great guide for working with developing your meditation. It's much more simple in design and layout, has materials that you can follow, and also pages where you can write, and different ways of contemplations. She's got beautiful contemplations and affirmations throughout the book. So that one's Meditations, a Guided Journal for Women. So just some resources that you can look at. And I will just also mention for people, it's really nice to consider that there are many apps. Carla had mentioned apps before, but there are really quite a few apps that are available now that we have, these, smart devices. I like Headspace. I like Calm. I like Insight Timer. There's many, many more. I'm not advocating for any particular app. I'm just saying there are some great ones out there, and some of the ones that I think are pretty good are Insight Timer, Calm, Headspace. But like I said, there's many other ones. Did you want to add to that, Carla?
Yeah, I'd love to throw the 10% Happier app into the mix. I think that's an excellent one.
Right, Sam Harris. Yeah.
Yeah. Dan Harris, actually.
Dan Harris. I know.
And Sam Harris also has one, the Waking Up app, I think. That's also meditation. There's also an app called the Breathing app, where you're just sort of, it's sort of a ball that kind of opens and closes, or gets larger and smaller, I guess, depending visually on how you want to describe that. And there's a sound, like sort of a sound that rises on the inhale and descends on the exhale. And that, just for breathing, can be a great one.
Oh yeah, I actually really like that as well, because the visual can be very helpful when people are first learning how to breathe. As the ball gets larger, you're expanding, or you're bringing breath into your body. And as you're exhaling, the ball gets smaller, you're releasing your breath. And they time it so that it helps the, early breath practitioner or meditator to learn how to follow and focus with a guide in place. That can be really very, very helpful. There's other more guided applications like that can be very helpful in the early stages, when you're really trying to get a better handle of how to be with the breath, or be with awareness. So those things can be very helpful. The thing that I really like, Carla, about some of the apps is that it kind of gives people a structure to follow. You mentioned before body scan, but I don't think that's a familiar term for a lot of people. I wonder if you have a favorite video or app that has a good example, maybe of a lengthier, like a 5 or a 10 or 15-minute body scan on it, so people can get a better sense of how to do a body scan.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't, not off the top of my head, but I certainly have a few written down. Perhaps after this, we can add them to the blog,
For sure.
where people can sort of access them through a link.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I agree that, really exploring through all these different formats is very useful. I think, we develop tastes around these things. So some people will want to be guided. Some people will just enjoy the sound of rain in the background. Some people will like silence, or, as you say, that visual element. And I think it's just a good reminder to say that, when we're developing a practice, it's a dynamic and very personal practice. That really has to be tailored toward what's working, what isn't, what we like, what we don't like. I will add too that while my website does give a wealth of information on mindfulness, an easier place to just sort of grab, tidbits and a meditation here and there is through my Instagram, the handle being @the Drop-In Project. And that can be used as another resource if there's interest.
Oh, that's fantastic. So maybe if you want to connect with Usha again, and she'll post some of those to the blog post related to our conversation. And also if people feel like they want to pick this up or share it with anybody, then they can go to the annabaranowski.com website and just go to the resource section in the radio show. And then you'll be able to see both Carla's show today. And if you want to share it later on podcast, it's going to be available if people want to listen to it. And then we are also going to have on that page maybe some of the apps that we discussed, links to those apps and to Carla's Twitter. Sorry, you didn't say Twitter, you said
Instagram,
where they can pick up some practices and things like that. So that's kind of exciting as well. So why don't we do that? We'll get that up. Here's a question. This came from Monica. Thank you, Monica. This is an interesting question. Hi, Carla. Doctor, does meditation help with weight loss? What are your thoughts about that, Carla?
I think that it certainly can. I think, meditation is all about teaching us how to monitor what's going on with us inside and outside. And so I think that when we are thinking about weight loss, we're again thinking about, we think about weight loss, I think, from many perspectives, right? It's like, what we're putting in our bodies, also how we're moving our bodies. And I think when we start to pay attention to these things, and particularly in a positive way, where we're starting to remove some habits that may be maladaptive and enhance or create habits that are more adaptive, such as potentially wanting to lose weight, when we start to pay attention to, am I eating now because I'm hungry, or am I eating now because I'm sad? And have I moved my body this week? Maybe I can go for a little walk and move my body. I think we start to pay attention to these things. It's really that awareness that comes from learning how to focus on certain things and sustain our attention on certain things and sit with certain things, that we open up ourselves to the ability to choose, how we are going to, for instance, if we decide we want to adjust our weight in some way, whether it's losing or even gaining, it gives us the choice to take certain actions in that direction, or to become aware of when certain actions are debilitating for us or working against that goal.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I've heard many people talk about emotional hunger, and how sometimes, the eating isn't because they're hungry, but because they're feeling something. And I guess when we have a practice of meditation, we can allow ourselves to notice the urge without actually having to do the eating of something we're not hungry for, so that we can actually, really be a bit more aware. But I think that in a way it's an advanced practice, because I think the urge is so strong that, until you get to a place where you could really settle into the urge and the discomfort, especially if you're eating to, stop a strong emotional feeling and you're not yet comfortable with your strong emotional feelings, it could really be quite the balancing act to achieve that. So, I think it's true, like Carla said, this is a process and a practice. It's not something that will start immediately. And having patience is really important. Now, this one is a final one. It's from Jane, who asks, how does Carla work with her clients? Live Zoom. Thanks. Maybe you can just answer that question, Carla.
Yeah, I work predominantly on Zoom. In fact, I started working on Zoom before we went into COVID. I find it remarkably effective, despite what many people say about, being in the presence of someone else, which obviously has huge benefit as well. But I've found that the work I do is still incredibly impactful and effective over Zoom. And I have the ability to work with many more people, and to, really have a much wider scope and access doing it that way. So
I want to thank you so much, Carla, for joining us. I mean, I think the conversation, I feel like we've just scratched the surface. We've got to stop because we are just about at 2:00. It was an absolute pleasure and delight to speak with you. I want to thank you so much for the work that you are doing out there. I know it makes a huge difference to so many people. I wish you all the listeners out there, be well. Reach out to Carla if you found this interesting, or share the dropinproject.com, or share the show with our podcast, Bear Psychology. And wishing you all a wonderful month. I hope we will catch up again with you in December. We will have a show, be well, everyone.
thank you so much, Anna, and happy Thanksgiving to those in the U.S.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.